Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Cybersecurity Amplified and Intensified. What'd you do? Did you kill it? That's fine. Now I gotta go edit stuff. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Cybersecurity Amplified and Intensified. All right, just let it go. It is what it is. Welcome. We got Jon Murchison, Blackpoint Cyber, Allan Liska, Recorded Future, Matt Lee from PAX8, and Vince Crisler from Dark Cubes. And we have John Wetzel joining us soon. Who wants to go first?
Well, I wanted to open it up a little bit. I know we kind of talked about this a little bit last time, but with ReEvil kind of going quote unquote dark with some of the minions that have been arrested, it's definitely opened it up and let LockBit 2.0 kind of go out. And I know, Allan, you and I were, kind of commenting in our own threads and kind of mixing around a little bit on a couple of them in Twitter that, we're definitely seeing a little less of the high powered or the high brand name ransomware groups, if you want to use that term, really kind of coming back, except for LockBit 2.0. And as of this morning, I've seen that LockBit 2.0 has successfully breached out the eFile.com, which is a big national company for filing IRS tax and state tax refunds, which is kind of a big freaking deal. They haven't published any information on their name or fame site yet, but I think they've only got a couple days left.
So, one of the things we always have to be careful with LockBit is they have a tendency to overpromise and underdeliver, which is great for us. Sure. I think Valerie Markiv out of Paris did an analysis, and there were something like 60 of the big LockBit victims that turned out to be a third party, or it was just some data that was caught up in another attack. So we always have to be cautious, but obviously it could be really bad if it turns out to be what they say. And that being said, third-party ransomware attacks have grown to be a huge problem. You not only have to worry about your defenses when it comes to ransomware, but you have to worry about what all of your third parties are doing, or at least what they're doing with your data to make sure they're secure. I know more and more companies that I work with are not just relying on questionnaires, but actual proof of, hey, how are you protecting our data in the event of a ransomware attack? And I just spit all over you all. Sorry about that.
I'm far enough away. We're okay.
Yeah.
It didn't reach. You hit a good point. I mean, we're the public buzzword today is supply chain, right? Conversations, but in reality, it is data flows, and it is sharing data with third parties, and the risk of that kind of breach. I hadn't thought about it that way, Allan. That's an interesting thought process of just the chain of attack, and as well for your data and its risk, and this kind of somewhat public doxing, right? Like, I think if I understood you correctly, it's kind of we got this data and some of it's eFile data, so they're the biggest name. Let's make this the eFile breach and let's hold them ransom, right? Is that as I understand you correctly?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, that's what happened with Blackbaud last year. It was, or 2 years ago now. Jesus, it's been.
We're getting old.
Nobody cared about Blackbaud themselves getting hit. They cared about this university and this charity and this school and so on. And so it really does become that problem. Like, it's Apple last year during their big event where. What was it? Quanta Computer got hit with ransomware, but ReEvil didn't talk about Quanta. They talked about how, look at all this Apple data that we have.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So is it ego or is it branding? Like, why would you kind of
both?
Yeah,
I do think it's a little bit of both. We kind of talked about
in a business, you're getting notoriety and brand name and more business. So I suppose like some of this, like I want to pay you to get a target, like. Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, and I wonder, especially the affiliate stuff, right? I mean, some of these groups, like when they bring a new affiliate, they have to bring a pelt to the table, and they want it to be a big, meaningful one. I mean, we stopped LockBit 2.0 a couple of months ago, and an enterprise customer. This is like a major brand name, and they. Unfortunately, it wasn't a cool hack because it was so freaking easy to RDP in, which is what they did.
Making my head
but this would have taken out the entire ERP platform for all of Asia for a massive brand name. And what was interesting is we had stopped probably 2 or 3 other times, someone that came in that just won't close down this attack vector. It must have been them, but their tools weren't down. But I have my timeline up here. When you guys mentioned LockBit, I just searched it on my computer. It was at like 1753 RDP from the internet. 1757, they're already mounting shares on all the other servers. So they knew exactly.
External SMB or mounting the other servers shares to
other servers, just $sign, it's always like, the first step before you get smashed. But
I thought you meant they were also allowing external SMB connections to the internet.
They probably
were mounting these shares. I'm like, oh my God. Like,
but they had a stolen Microsoft Dynamics account, which was, it was Allan. I'm curious what you saw. This was the first time, we saw them. They were kind of sloppy. So in their kind of enumeration phase, they uploaded all their tools. And normally they kind of wait a little bit longer if they're any good.
Until they know what's monitoring, until they know what EDRs, until they know what they have to.
It was all Chinese tools, which is surprising.
I think it is
what you've seen.
So I think to your point, you have different levels of affiliates. That some are good, some are bad. And remember, we've caught affiliates all over the world. So, we know most of these groups are headquartered in Russia, but they have affiliates. I mean, there were 3 affiliates out of Canada that were arrested last year. And it's like, Canada? Was not expecting that. But, to John, I think one of the things that you built on that I think is really important that people need to understand, and Eric and Shiva and I have talked about this repeatedly, I know the sexy thing is, we need this fancy EDR and we need this fancy AI thing. I say that coming from an AI company, and we need this fancy machine learning thing in order to stop ransomware. But also, you need to not allow RDP from the outside. Like, you really need to cover the basics. Just
the hygienic aspects, right? Like the things that are just known. Yeah. Right.
I mean, just in January, we worked with 2 healthcare providers that managed to stop a ransomware attack, and it was a third-party vendor that just RDP'd. The vendor was compromised, and they just RDP'd straight into the healthcare network. Fortunately, both of those networks had good identity and access management. And when that, creds from that vendor server tried reaching out to other servers in the network, they alerted and they stopped it. And I'm like, awesome, good job. And those were both PISA ransomware attacks. And it's like, you have to cover the basics before you can get to all the whiz bang stuff.
Yep. And I mean, to some of the point that was discussed a moment ago about, just getting, the notoriety. I mean, it wasn't just but a couple of weeks ago that the affiliate for the Red Cross got breached. I don't know, maybe somebody could correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if the actual threat actor has actually been released or did their claim like, yep, we did it. It's been kind of quiet because now they realized, oh, fuck, that third party entity was dealing for the Red Cross. So maybe they did back down. But yeah.
But you know what, though? I want to postulate, like, fast forward a little bit. I'm not saying that FSB arresting, the players of Soda Nakibi was, anything other than histrionics to some extent. But you are seeing a world where assets can be burned that were these proxy assets, right? You're starting to see a world where, just like in our espionage and in our, our clandestine services, sometimes you burn an asset. Sometimes you have this thing where it can turn on you. Well, if you are these players that have operated in a lot of the Eastern Bloc countries, in China, which this isn't changing there, but if you look at them and the government now turns on you and some of those things become quite public, you might see less of this attribution chest beating, from affiliate gangs, right? Other than the TTPs and the tools and the things that lead you there that help you. I wonder if you don't see less of this. Oh yeah, we got you. Instead, they're like, we just want the money from the stupid data broker. We're not going to bring up the big fish that's going to get us like people with gasoline in trash bags and potentially a missile in grandma's window, right? Like, I think we might see some changes.
Yeah, they're in a weird. I agree because they become a liability. They're a useful tool and a useful standoff kind of force to create chaos and enrich folks. The weird part is they kind of half need to market so people know when their brand hits, they'll
right.
drop
this
your
was
shit.
A lock
They're absolutely going to leak your data. But I agree with you. It's kind of interesting, and that was clearly, in my opinion, tied to this whole Ukraine-U.S. negotiations.
Of course,
I mean,
we're back to that same combo again.
And so I don't know if they were drinking vodka like right after the fake arrest, or like trick the Americans some more, or if it was real. I mean, I will
mean,
say
we've seen the after effects of that with the and apologize for any kids watching, but with the _Maze Twitter account over the last 24 hours going on these drunken rants, and threatening security researchers and Brian Krebs and and everything else. So so I do think you're right, John, that there's been this. Well, we all I think we all agree that the arrests were kind of a showpiece, right? It wasn't a serious law enforcement action. I do think it has had some negative effect on some of these ransomware groups. Knock on wood, we've seen a real slowdown in the last week or so of publications to ransomware extortion sites. Doesn't mean that ransomware attacks are slowing down. Please, nobody take that from it. But the publication of data on some of the bigger ransomware extortion sites is slow to a crawl.
Well, Alan, I just told my board we always have like a Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. kind of like pre-zone update, and I told them, I was like, I hate saying this because I'm gonna eat my words tonight, but the past month we have had quite a drop. I mean, we had a save last night.
Don't you Ricky Bobby me, Jon Murchison.
I know. Yeah, I know. God, I love that movie. But we've seen a little bit of a drop in activity. I mean, we did. And Alan, we'll share this with you guys because we got some Power Ton stuff a couple of years ago, the Iranian stuff. We got their whole kit and we shared that with you guys. But we stopped pretty darn sure Chinese nation state the week of Thanksgiving. And there was some interesting kind of tradecraft in there, and definitely evading a couple EDRs fully, not even like a single, kind of alert. So it's an interesting space. And I don't know what's going to happen with this whole Russia thing, but I got to think there's going to be some cyber activity going on, but it's probably not going to be in the name of ransomwaring, random places. I think it's going to be a little probably more serious if it happens.
So I've been talking to a lot of my SANS alumni this week, and some of them are located over in that part of the world. I'm just not going to say who or where, but they're all saying that this is a false flag, that Putin doesn't really want to invade. He's going to make it look like and do all this stuff to get attention out of us. And it sounds like it maybe is from us and other NATO countries that are starting to drop military aid into Ukraine. That he's, like I said, it's a dry run. It's a false flag. I don't know how true it is or anything, but a lot of them are saying, start looking at your infrastructure because they're going to come and we're about to have a cyber war coming out of that region against all of the Western industry.
It could be, the problem in cyber is like we all live in a glass house on this game. I mean, I can tell you if they cross that line and do something serious, whether it's to a port or, utility or something, like it will be the United States, my opinion, will treat that as an extremely serious event and will respond probably not even in kind.
They'll say, I'm going to get a little political now. So fuck it. Here we go. Yeah. I mean, Biden is a giant piece of crap, in my opinion. We still got people in fucking Afghanistan that haven't been able to pull out.
Yeah.
We still got private entities going in there and people who have special forces and all this other stuff that are pulling U.S. citizens that wanted out of Afghanistan. Do we really think that this government's going to stand up and kick Putin's ass? Or is it going to be more of companies like yours and Recorded Future and Darkcube and all that with me as a little guy trying to help out? Hey, I'm here. But it's going to be like the independent companies trying to come in and actually stand up. I mean, what do you guys think?
I think on defensive side, there's no question us in the commercial world are doing the lion's share of the work because like the government doesn't have a good way to defensively stop stuff and reach into private companies. I mean, they just don't. The infrastructure, just technically, it couldn't really work. But where the government does have capabilities is offensive. And I do believe, I don't think, and I don't even think it's an administration thing and like what the response would be. But I do think that it would be taken extremely serious. And I have no idea. I don't think anyone knows. I mean, Putin's clearly trying to, reestablish a bit of the old Soviet empire. And clear, you know, it was interesting. The first one, I think everyone knew, like under the hood, that it was bullshit because there's no supply, there's no medics, there's no fuel, like there was nothing that could sustain invasion. That's completely different with my understanding right now. I could see a big show of force and then a pretty heavy, like kind of kick up of their kind of insurgent forces, well, you know, I think is what they call them, or the separatists or whatever, as opposed to a full-scale invasion. Because, you know, these full-scale invasions, I just finished rewatching World War II in color on Netflix. I encourage everyone to watch that. The history lessons from that, like half the shit is replaying out right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what is this, Poland? We'll just let them have a little bit of Poland. And
and so
I don't think Russia's the biggest threat, though. I really think China's Belt and Road Initiative,
there's no question.
The things they do, like, long term, sure, I agree. Yeah.
There's no question. China's biggest short-term threat.
In the short term, like, there's nothing that's better at distracting people than war. Yeah. And, you know, with the unrest that's happening in the world around COVID and all of these other things, like governments, I think, would be more than happy to jump in against Russia if they did something. And I think Russia knows that. Yeah. So I think that's, to me, like, that's the overwhelming thing here is people aren't going to hold back if something goes down because it's a great distraction.
They've been locked in the house for so long, and here we go, boys. Let's wrap it up. Now we're out and fighting. Yes.
So I just finished reading Semi-State Actors in Cybersecurity.
That's going on my list.
And you know, John, to your point, he makes the same point. So what he does is he ties where we are in the world of cybersecurity today to piracy and privateering in the 17th and through 19th century. And exactly to your point, one of the things that was a challenge for countries was they didn't have navies. They didn't have professionalized navies to protect the waters. So they paid people, they paid mercantiles, they paid privateers to go in and protect trade routes and commerce and so on, who then, as they established their navies, those privateers became kind of pirates. And you know, and it's interesting to see the parallels. I don't know that I fully buy the argument entirely, but I do think the parallels are really interesting between what was happening on the waters in the sort of the 17th through the 19th century and how that evolved, and what's happening in cybersecurity today. Because you're absolutely right.
They're both unregulated. They're both semi-international. They both don't have defined laws and bodies of governance. Like, yeah, absolutely accurate correlation.
Yeah, and you know, we're leaving cybersecurity up to private companies to protect. And now part of that, at least in the US, is nobody wants the government to come in and offer protection until they've been hit. Then whatever free services you can get from the National Guard or FBI or whatever are often really appreciated. Sometimes not, but often like, okay, we're overwhelmed. We really need the help. But I do love the analogies, and it's definitely an interesting conversation. Plus, you get to read about pirates,
which is always fun.
Right.
That's super cool. I just posted a link in the chat, and I think Eric's going to push it out publicly. But it's a 30-year-old interview of a KGB defector talking about exactly how Russia looks to create division within democracies. And it is literally, it's 30 years ago, and it is described what we've just seen in the past. I would just say, 6 or so years going on in the United States. And, I think another part of the Ukraine strategy is to they like breaking up our alliances, creating distrust, not, feeding us disinformation. I mean, that's the dirty secret that
not
people
happening.
Don't know. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah.
You just triggered the hell out of me on this one, like disinformation campaigns. Well, you mean if you have two partisan situation, you don't create this tension that just tears them apart and drives them to completely be polar opposites instead of centrist? No.
Watch this video. It is like, but I guess the point is they know this. And they've been doing this for a long time, and
1,000-year wars.
They're an old civilization, right? They understand this. This is like Sun Tzu shit, and I think it's Ukraine's another interesting one. I mean, like we'd have a lot better response if Germany would step up to the freaking plate, right? Yeah. Which they're not. I would be.
But Germany is not going to, because didn't the whole gas pipeline get approved between Germany and Russia?
Yeah,
So
that's the thing.
They're going to be on Russia's side.
Wasn't the pipeline was just a way to subvert Ukraine?
Yeah.
I mean, that's all. So Putin really doesn't care about it if he gets the Ukraine.
Yeah, he needs the money though. Their economy is very reliant on energy, almost entirely. You know, so it's an interesting one because they would have a lot more leverage if they were being like, yeah, pipeline's done. If you step foot in there, but you know, you can't just magically get gas over it. You'd probably there'd have to be a lot of work going on with Qatar specifically. They're a major natural gas producer, and they have the ships to actually get it moved.
But Russia is developing their northern front with new ports. What is it, a $100 billion or $10 billion project
up in the Arctic?
And it's being done with Dubai World.
Oh, I'm not surprised. They build some of the best and biggest ports around.
Yeah, so they're planning for the eventuality, but it is what it is unless we can do something about it.
Speaking of ports, like here's one for you.
3389.
Huh? Well, yeah, not that one.
That's the
3390, so they can't find it.
That's the ransomware.
We had one of those the other day, actually, Matt.
That is the ransomware deployment protocol. Just so you know.
There we go. That is the best. Like, so if you ever watched like some of the attacks on Iran, you know, there's been like a similar, obviously between Israel and Iran, at least from the outside view, like, you know, clearly a lot of covert stuff going on. Ports have been hit and disrupted and ships. One thing that is like been bothering the hell out of me in the United States is when you look, like I've seen a lot of ports and toured them. When you look at the ports and where the cranes come from, which without a crane, you don't have a port.
Exactly.
They're all Chinese, all PLC controlled, and almost all connected right into the Windows domain network from what I've seen. Like this is where our government for super critical infrastructure needs to step the hell up.
Hey, we're at least bringing some chip plants back to Ohio, right?
Good.
We need to bring. You saw Intel's announcement, but they're building
as a Buckeye. OHIO.
Heck yeah.
And they're going to bring the University of Ohio.
The Ohio State University.
Well, this is one of the things that Vince always goes on about with Tuya.
Yeah, I think you're right on in the fact that we have these you have these not necessarily government entities in these companies, and whether it's DJI or Tuya or Huawei or ZTE or Hikvision, all these technology companies that are getting globally distributed. Tuya is one that I'm particularly passionate about because they're in this consumer IoT space. Yeah. And if you've looked at how they're plugged into almost every IoT device that you see on the shelf at Walmart and Best Buy and these places. And so like they have complete command and control of all these devices. They have temperature sensors, they have light sensors, they have microphones. And if this is not you'd have to convince me pretty hard that this is not a strategic approach.
Yeah, I think the question would be, has anybody analyzed any of that, and seen evidence of? Because it's in my mind, if that's the case, then I think that it's a brilliant idea. I think between that and the ability to create very, very large reflexive attacks with those botnets as well, you could see that as a very strategic sword that would be very hard to cut every piece of that sword out, right? Like without just complete disconnection of network between external sources. So, it's huge.
I've done two different reports where I've assessed those devices and I've seen kind of communications going back and really bad security. The analogy I use is like the Tacoma Narrows Bridge that I'm sure we all watched. It hits that resonant frequency, and you get a bunch of these.
I can even see that with one eye. Like it's not good, right?
God.
Yeah. And so, what can you do if you have a million of these small devices in your control that are connected to the grid? Like, what if you turn off every thermostat on the coldest day of the year in New York City?
Yeah,
right? Like
we can't cold start our grid. Yeah, not at all. Any third of it. So
we did a lot of work in like smart properties. Well, pretty much every modern Class A building kind of falls in that category. Like we kind of stopped pressing on selling into that sector, post pandemic, because commercial real estate wasn't the best there. But it is shocking. how, BACnet, for example, building automation control net, like
Sure.
it's a very SCADA like protocol and totally unauthenticated. So as soon as you get in those networks, you can just craft packets and change set points and turn fans on and
100%.
change thermostats and do all that stuff. Like that's a whole, just think about the government contractor infrastructure. Like that's a risk area that I think, and the good news is I'm seeing, what is it in Columbia, Maryland? I forget the guy's name that's running. It's kind of a private government partnership where they're doing a lot of good work on kind of building security, because that's another latent.
Is that Dragos that's doing that? Is that who's?
No, well, Dragos might be involved. They're obviously they're kind of a threat intel and threat hunting on the ICS side, and they have good intelligence there. It's Dreamport. It's like they have a big cyber command involvement, but I'm seeing them do a bunch of the hack the building things, because we started on the building kick like 4 years ago. Because it was shocking. Like, what you find is, and this is another big area of, kind of concern I have, is that your whole badge control, access control, badge swipes, cameras, most of these systems are integrated now. And all these they're like vulnerable coming out of the factory to everything. They'll have default passwords and shit. But the part that scares me, and I think Sony learned it the hard way, is they all recommend you integrate it with Active Directory.
Yep.
Yes.
Right. Yeah,
that's the worst
you can know
thing
where your humans are.
Yeah, and so if you fire someone, you just smoke their AD account and their badge swipe's gone. But you know what happens when you have a ransom attack? Your whole, I think Mayor Shipping got that.
Yeah, who was that was locked out of their building when they were trying to restore? This was just recently. This was who was that? Does anybody remember?
It was it Facebook? No. Maybe
it was Facebook. It wasn't because of the attack. It was because that BGP drop that happened that created the DNS attack, because everybody, I love that everybody was pulling DNS. They were trying to pull DNS so hard to get to Facebook that they created their own DDoS attack against Facebook because of that, or against the root servers. But anyways, joking aside, if I recall, Facebook was totally out because they didn't have that, and that dependency was there. That's
it's another great attack access vector. These cranes ship with cameras already preloaded on them. Why? Because you have video control when you're moving the crane. That's what you're looking at all around.
Talk about physical access control breaches. I just turn the crane and swing a big shipping container into your building.
It's that's the part. I don't know how often Chinese hook stuff out of the factory. I think they're smart enough to not do that a lot, but the update mechanisms, you look at
you could inject it at the time of need through those update patterns.
What about look at Huawei Net Engine routers? Right. So these are kind of routers you'd use in an MPLS backbone. Those backbones are the core of every modern telecommunication, cell phone system. They're all MPLS cores. And all your SS7 is actually mapped into a protocol called SIGTRAN.
Good old Signaling System 7.
Yeah, but there's an IP version of it, and they use MPLS VRFs, the virtual routing forwarding table kind of setups, to separate your voice from all the signaling data. But that type of router, the firmware is like in a Cisco, your binary image on a traditional Cisco router, it loads the whole thing to memory. There's a similar, but there's actually two boot ROMs. There's two firmwares loaded, a baby one and a big one are prepackaged in just that normal update. That it's is how I would do it,
because BIOS, and then they build the actual OS.
But the fact that Western companies even let them anywhere near their core telecommunications infrastructure is the craziest shit I've seen in a while. I mean, it is such a latent bomb waiting to go off.
Vince, he's got something to say. I'll shut up.
Sorry, I'm gonna stop talking.
I was just gonna say, one of my favorite meetings I've ever had back when I was supporting DHS was in the room with the representatives from Huawei, representatives from the U.S. government around CFIUS in the Sprint. I don't know if you guys remember the Sprint issue with Huawei, where they were doing a bunch of the backbone for the Sprint network, and CFIUS killed it eventually. But the Huawei folks were U.S. citizens, talking on behalf of Huawei. Everything's good and clean. We're more than happy to put all of our code in escrow. You can have access to everything. We're not hiding anything. Look in my sleeves. There's nothing here, right? And it just goes back to that, but as soon as you update or change, or and we also proved, we were working with Sandia National Labs at the time, and they were able to prove that if you have control of hardware and software, right? In the manufacturing process, you can embed backdoors that nobody will ever find.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, for sure. And there's a lot of custom ASICs in the Huawei kind of processors. You know, the other thing that's interesting, and this hasn't gotten enough coverage. I have 100% direct proof because we did the analysis many, many years ago. The original net engine router, and you can find, I think it's in a Avaya product guide now, right? So this is a bunch of years old now. They stole Nortel's router code straight up. So they put Nortel out of business. Nortel started outsourcing engineering and partnering with Huawei, and Huawei stole it all. You can literally look at, I think it's like the Nortel Secure Router 6000 or 8000, and in like at page 235 in the book, you'll see Quidway on one of the prompts. That's freaking Huawei. They even wrote the guide. That, in my opinion, they went from zero to hero in this telecommunications space, not because they ripped off Cisco. It's because they ripped off Nortel's carrier class stuff, and they ripped off Ericsson's phone switching and over-the-air stuff. If you look at where their offices is, they're always really close to Ericsson.
But it's the way they did it, though.
Yeah.
So where do we go?
For Nortel.
Like, yeah. When you look at SolarWinds as an example of like a highly effective supply chain attack that, you know, a company may or may not have had much ability to control, and we look at the threat of China going in the future, we look at the fact that a lot of these pretty atrocious cyber attacks we're seeing today are the result of really stupid things when there's lots of amazing security technology out there. Yeah. Like what's the next 5 years hold for us? Like how do we start to shore this stuff up?
You have to bring it back stateside. And the biggest problem that the US has, and this is going to probably catch me a lot of shit, is you have a lot of multi-generational people that are younger than me or about my age whose family came from these countries that could be activated at any point in time. So I think it's harder for us to secure it, but it's got to be done domestically. And that's something we were talking to John about on the last episode with Matt about bringing everything back home.
I think that the problem's significantly more nuanced. I mean, I think you could be speaking about a point, but my challenge is that we're going to have a lot of death. I think we're going to, and I don't mean that necessarily in physical humans, but I really mean that in companies, in loss, in financial loss, in conversations that put Allan and I sitting at the same country club talking about how he's no longer in business. Like that's the only way we change these things to where we start making this a professional, relationship. And what I mean by that is like, there's nothing that says I know a damn thing. There is literally no barrier to entry to be in this world and give advice along technology. There's none, absolutely zero. When I go to Microsoft and say, hey, Microsoft, why do you still allow insecure passwords as any part of anything? Why is that even part of it? Why would you not include MFA? We can't afford the market share loss because the people don't believe in this. That's where you're at. You go to China, you're no longer in business if you don't do what they say you're going to do next, right? Or you're dead potentially in some of the Russian systems, right? So like you run into this world where we're fighting a hearts and minds problem. Our United States puts profit, and I'm a capitalist. I want to make sure I state that before we go down this road. But we put profit before other things, and that's always the case. And then you have an immature, unconcerned citizenry and an immature, unconcerned consumer that has no regulation or barrier to entry. Like we're back to where doctors were, 150 years ago. They had leeches and saws, and they could do those two things. But as Allan learned something and Shiva learned something and doctors started sharing and we started having this, we're kind of in that grassroots part of practitioners that understand what they're doing, that have gained some skill set, but there's nothing that stops the industry from having a trunk slammer walk in and say, no, you don't need to do that. We'll keep RDP open. No, your legacy infrastructure anchor is what you should be trying to get rid of every single minute, let alone the supply chain challenge. That's just the same challenge as somebody else's computer doing the same horrible shit you're doing as a vendor, right? Like, and I think the challenge we have starts at hearts and minds, vendor. I think we have other challenges in the sense that Congress gets to sit for thousands of years. We have challenges that drive this inability to bring a technology discussion that happened probably 50 times as fast as the Industrial Revolution, just over time and iteration and capabilities and technology. And yet even the Industrial Revolution was a great example of how long it took us to have infrastructural support between public and private partnerships to drive the regulation, but also the builder that puts the stuff together right, and the inspector that checks to make sure that these nails are 16-inch studs. And we're not there in cyber, and we've been building this with profit first. And I think the challenges we face are so wide and so vast that we're going to have these events where companies lose public trust, and our adversaries get to win that basic kind of degradation of what we have as a society. It's what drives me to do what I do. But yeah, little string pull on that one.
Yeah,
So,
man, you make a lot of great points. I think the other thing I'm seeing, at least, is on the education front. I think our universities are doing an incredible disservice to cybersecurity.
I thought you were about to support them. I was like, the universities are the ones that were hitting me the most often. Those guys are idiots.
I literally have a rule. Get this. I will not hire someone with a cybersecurity degree.
Yeah.
I'm out.
Right now, I'm not throwing shade.
We love you, Eric. It's okay.
But unless, I'll make an exception if there's tons of hands-on. Why? Being a great security practitioner is a lot more like going through, like, I'm an apprentice, I'm a journeyman, I'm a master pipe fitter, or I'm going through a residency and I'm specializing in a discipline in the doctor world. And we as the universities are just taking money from these kids. They come out, they're button pushers. They don't know shit about fundamentals, unfortunately. And the reality is it's a progression. You have to be great at IT first, in my opinion, right? And then you can start moving into being a master at protecting that stuff.
You got to know biochemistry before you start putting a scalpel in somebody,
right?
Just the way it works in
I
doctors,
think this is where our government could really use a more national level kind of framework for a training program. I mean, I can assure you, unlike other parts of the government in cyber, they absolutely have within it this exact, apprentice, journeyman, master concept, and it's hard. That's a huge problem I think we're dealing with, because the talent, it took us, we just finally made a major hire to run our new we have a new skunkworks type unit coming out of our threat up center. I started looking in June or July, just found the person.
Wow.
Full court press all these months. I mean, it's shocking.
I'm sure Allan can talk to the point, like, you hire these kids right out of college with all their AI ML and they can revolutionize the world, right? It's just as easy as getting the right data set.
I mean, I just hired, so I have 2 ransomware interns that help me out, one doing research, one doing malware analysis, and both obviously have are from colleges, and yeah, I think there is a disparity. I found some really good, really motivated applicants. So we when we put up the second intern position, we had 40 applicants within a couple of weeks, which was absolutely amazing. I didn't think we'd get 5 because I didn't know anybody wanted to be a ransomware intern. And yeah, there were a bunch of them that I was like, okay, you're not going to make it. But there were a number that were really motivated, had done a bunch of side projects, had done some really cool work. And so I was really impressed and really excited with some of them. And I've been really happy with the woman that we brought on. She's been, really amazing. And as far as understanding how to do malware analysis, and then, picking up how we do it to make sure that, she's in compliant with us and doesn't, accidentally encrypt our entire network.
That would be good.
I never thought about that. Yeah, that's kind of important, huh?
I dropped this malware payload. Yeah.
I've been really impressed, but I think, John, one of the things that I've advocated for, not that anybody listens to me, is I think we should do something like AmeriCorps for cybersecurity. That you bring in people, you give them the hands-on training, especially at the school level, at the actually protecting schools, not teaching, but protecting schools, protecting state and local governments, areas where we really need a lot of help right now. That we can get these people in.
Volunteerism program to that's brilliant.
It's almost like when you're going through the trades
before they move on. I'm sorry.
In high school, like, there was kind of one track where you could go down the trade track, and a lot of those folks went off to a different facility, but then they came back and would try and put some of those skills to use in the school. It's a great learning ground. I love that idea. I mean, I'll tell you, we definitely hire out of colleges, but we hire out of their hacking clubs, which is all grassroots.
Yeah,
like, we sponsor
100%.
the Tampa University Hacking Club. We give them money, to help support that, because at least we know those kids want hands-on, and they're trying, and they're doing what you need there. So that, don't take my comments. I think it's the formal actual degree that I just think is doing them a disservice.
But So, and I know I speak a lot, so y'all can just tell me shut up or like have a custom mute button or something. Like I'm good with that. But when I was at a large MSP, we had better threat detection capabilities than a lot of MSPs, and we actually did notice that there were threat actors doing phishing campaigns targeted at former owners of MSPs we had acquired. So there was about 12 MSPs that had rolled up in this, and so they were spraying them. But the thing was, they were coming from Purdue University. Like legitimately checking out like everything, DKIM, all of it, right? Completely signed, completely accurately coming from them. And they were coming from UCLA. Like I'm doxing them now. It's been 3 or 4 years. I don't care. They're all relative dicks about it. But as I reached out to these individual people and the FBI, and I shared a lot of public-private partnership personally, and so I was reaching out saying, hey, listen, physics.ucla is compromised. The head of physics department is sending emails to my people, right? A treasurer in California, and so you start looking at all these people that are being compromised. Presumably, it seemed like Chinese threat actors based on the data we were sharing with the FBI about the telemetry. And ultimately, it was just so shocking to me at how bad the response was. At Purdue, it took me 3 weeks to get through to someone to realize the account was compromised. At UCLA, I never, ever, ever got anything back. I reached out to their SOC team at UCLA, and they said, oh, that's a subdomain? We don't handle that. We don't do the subdomains. Physics department has their own Exchange server, and little Johnny runs it. And like legit. And so, you triggered me, Allan, when you're talking about how they don't have the capabilities and like an AmeriCorps type response where we actually just provide that capability and oversight governance kind of reach as part of the quote apprenticeship. Like they're really bad. And they hold our intellectual property. That's where China's getting in so much with, anyways.
Well,
but I had some bad
almost no
experiences
universities out there control. Like I cut my teeth. Like my first job in networking was at the NOC at Maryland.
Yeah.
And all of the security stuff in these schools are not handled by full-time professionals. They're staffed by students getting paid $10 an hour. And the other thing is like universities will provide network access to like the drop in the wall, but almost none of them are set up where they're controlling all of the domain access. Like each little school rolls their own shit, and it's terrible, and it's half-assed, and it's run by grad students and other folks. So they don't even have and here's the worst part. We all know where the internet really started.
Allan
half
triggered.
These places
Let's go.
still are all publicly routable.
Yeah.
Do you know how many colleges like
they have class A blocks, right?
I know a massive one. Yeah, they have class A blocks. I know a massive one right now. Their entire security camera network is publicly routable. You can telnet and SH these things from
all
internet.
in Shodan.
Yeah, it's
sorry.
like,
You can always tell the people that have been hands-on by the people that say, "Well, it's really easy. All you need to do is patch, right? Like, patch your system. Like, why are you not doing this?" And it's it's like when you've been hands-on, it's not that straightforward.
It's not that straightforward.
So, John, I got my start at University of Maryland too.
Oh, you did?
My first job was I was a sociology major. And my first job was at the Survey Research Center doing their networking and security as such. I mean, there was no real concept of security. And literally my only qualification was I was one of the few guys, so I was willing to crawl under the desks and plug the network in.
Right.
So that's how I learned how Token Ring worked.
Token Ring.
Yes, I'm old. I am very, very old. But yeah, that was in the mid 90s. That was my first networking job, and that's how I learned how networking and IT worked.
Yeah. But you learn a lot. Like my first job there, the first thing they did, I got the new guy thing. They handed me a backpack vacuum, and I had to go to every building around the campus, and half of them were like dirt floors, and vacuum the hubs and switches because they would fill up with dust and overheat and turn off. And then after I did that, we had Cat 3 in most all the buildings at the time. So this was like 99, 2000. And I had to punch down entire like walls on 110 blocks of data. But and then it moved on to troubleshooting networking, combining the physical, but it's all those little building blocks and then configuring routers, deploying them, building domains like that tee you up to have an actual view of either what you're doing offensively or defensively and put in context the operation that the bad guys are doing against you. And however the program, an ideal training program looks, it really has to start at such raw IT fundamentals. I mean, it's just you guys would be sick to your stomach if you sat in some of the. I used to do a bunch of the tech interviews for SOC analysts, and they would throw out a lot of buzzwords, but I'd ask a simple question: are broadcasts routed between subnets by default? Like, it's really basic.
Yeah.
No one ever got it right.
Only inside this hallway. Think of it like hallways
Allan,
and doors.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about your point of like this public service. Maybe we could get one of these certification. I'm not a huge fan of certifications, but I think it's a start. But maybe you can get one or two of these companies to require, instead of continuing education, volunteer time. Like, in order to keep your X certification, you need 100 hours of volunteer hours a year.
Dude, that'd be huge.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I know, like, personally, I maintain the IT infrastructure for my church, which is like the most overbuilt IT infrastructure. I've got like 2 AD servers. I've got SCCM.
And I attack the
RMM,
infrastructure of your church. What a coincidence.
Because it's locked down.
And his whole church is like one pastor and 4 people in the congregation.
No. It's locked down.
I tease.
But the point is, like, being hands-on like that forces you to think differently about everything that's going on. Right. And so I think that would be an interesting thing I'm going to have to run with that, Allan.
Well, but the other side of it is the force multiplier aspect of it, right? It's that if you set up an endemic program where people are expected to do volunteerism around cyber and expected to do volunteerism around their things, then you actually create that. Okay, Matt Lee now is going to create 30 hours in the next 3 years to maintain my ISC squared membership, right? Like, I'm now going to go volunteer that. So if you add up all those hours and that knowledge transfer and potential, I mean, it's not like people in the profession don't want to give. I've never met anybody in the cybersecurity industry that isn't a giver, like in some degree or form. Like they just genuinely care about what they're doing. They're passionate. But that would almost force it to be much of a force multiplier to some extent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was even seeing it on Twitter where there was a bunch of people just bashing, I guess, us veterans to some degree, that that you have to have that entry level. You got to have some sort of basic understanding of technology before you go into InfoSec for these noobs. They're like, no, you just jump right in. I'm like, oh, fuck no, please stop telling these people this. You got to understand the fundamentals. You got, I hate the whole crawl, walk, run stuff, but if you don't know what you're doing, even with a putty terminal, you can cause a little bit of damage, right? I mean, you got to understand the technology you're using.
Give me PowerShell and I'll move the world.
Ooh, baby. Now you're talking about language.
I think
I'm
John's
going to throw a contrary argument in here. The domain is too big. This isn't plumbing. This isn't electricity. This isn't something that you can learn the fundamentals of it and basically apply it throughout every building that you're ever into. This is the military. This is, you've become a specialist in one area. I mean, sure, we can talk about DHCP and allocations. You can talk about FAT32 and whether or not you have enough space of screwing up your thumb drive as you move it over, which I did this weekend. I forgot how big your allocation drives are. Like, why is this 4 gig file not fitting on here? But at the end of the day, that doesn't help me with Active Directory and knowing how many things are going to be able to do that. That doesn't help me with understanding whether file mutexes are important, whether I'm doing reverse engineering. And it doesn't help me understand whether or not China is going to be different than Russia in their fundamental approaches to TTPs. Yeah. I think the domains are huge here. I love the aspect of volunteerism, but I think we have to think a little bit larger when we're really talking about where we talk about the fundamentals of this space, because what fundamentals for what space? Cybersecurity is no longer a single area.
But it's not. But the biggest attack surface is still Windows domain infrastructures. I mean, if there's any place to do fun, it's dying, but it's still everywhere. That's the game right now.
Well, no, here's my point, right? So if we look at this,
cloud.
how many of you have set an IRQ on a piece of hardware in the recent years?
In recent years.
Right. Because as we go, things normalize. And as we go, we get rid of some of the complexity of an entity. And what I'm seeing is, if I start a company tomorrow, I'm going to be on Azure Active Directory or AWS or Google or Okta. I'm going to tie it into SaaS applications with companies that I can now hold accountable to the way that they deal their DevSecOps. I'm going to start... You're going to see less variables. And I think, to John's point, the domain is massive. But if we started focusing on some of this motion that's happening, quote unquote, transformation, whatever, you're looking at, if I start a company, I have less complexity. I have more scriptable variables. I have more scriptable attack surface. I have more scriptable defense surface. I have a very predictable and scalable machine learning model because it's all tied to the same data set with the same normalized variables and the same attack surface and the same APIs and the same And I think that we're starting to see protocols not be as much of it. If you were an enterprise that owned a shit ton of legacy technical debt that was all invested in this massive infrastructure, massive data center, all the shit I own, and you were simply starting up with a SaaS application and doing it the same way, you would not have the same, kind of adherence to that. And if you look at SMB, the only reason they're still there is probably just because they don't have good advice. And I'll stand here and get punched in the face on the, but if you're in Microsoft or in your AWS, you're in Google, man, they know exactly how to attack you. Yep. And I know how to put the right defenses up. And I know how to respond to it.
Here goes the punch in the face, Matt. Manufacturing as a whole, and I think we've talked about this privately and probably publicly. I know this is just one industry, but I know a lot about manufacturing with, IR stuff that I've been doing lately. Their stuff is so legacy. You're not putting them in the cloud. I don't give a fuck what anybody says.
But I have a manufacturer. No, I have a manufacturer that is doing that has made up the crutches operationally to be able to say, you know what? The biggest problem is my DNC. The biggest problem is getting stuff to the machines to cut and getting that code in a secure way with CUI that's possibly part of it. And I have companies that are doing that. They're full AAD. They have no reliance. They've only extended it down to the machine that holds their DNC system that makes the OT crossover. Like, the reality is, like, it can be done. But Matt, it's just not going to be done. It's not
that is the business owner.
Yeah.
That's the business
advisor.
That.
Well, there's a little more nuance. We have hundreds and hundreds of manufacturer customers now. And like, I'll give you an example of, I did a assessment on a major manufacturer in the auto industry. So just think like 100,000 endpoints in their network. They have a press. It's massive. It's 20 some years old. It was tens and tens of millions of dollars. It was only built to work on NT. It can't be upgraded. Like, there's a lot of legacy production parts.
Oh, I see them all the time.
You can't just snap
but
your
they
fingers.
Don't have to be on the network. In most cases, they can be done with overcoming methodologies like serial to IP extensibility. And
that I agree with all day long. They got to separate that shit off their domain. Right. Straight up.
Yeah.
I mean, but no one does that.
I mean, that's separation of IT and OT, right? So
that we have providers that actually know what they're talking about.
Them. We have a prison. We map, all the other devices we see in our kind of network map. I can see all the PLCs. I know exactly what that is.
Oh my God. That's the door openers.
Fucking door openers.
Like we did a risk assessment for a prison in a previous company, and like the way you got to the PLCs was you unplug a network cable to a dual NIC on a computer. And if somebody forgot to unplug that,
oh my God.
So if somebody forgot to unplug it, everything was open. Right. And it's just like,
oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. You need a license to cut hair, but anybody can manage a firewall.
Right? You can drop exploits out whenever you want.
There's a board of cosmetology in every state.
The problem there goes for the vendors and the practitioners, because there are vendors out there who sell products that tell MSPs, hey, just buy our product. You will be an MSSP.
Yeah, you're done. That's all you need to be secure and be a security company.
So who do you hold accountable for all of this? I think it's got to be the practitioners, and it's got to be the vendors.
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
And the practitioner should freaking know better.
I like the apprenticeship methodology of
too.
Plumbers and electricians, where you spend time in the trenches, you get your hands dirty, and then when someone deems you worthy, you go take a test and get a certificate.
Mm-hmm.
The best offensive programs I've ever seen have a really structured, detailed build up. And it works.
Makes sense.
Creates world-class capability.
But even then, John, and I think to other John's point, that's a very vectored, structured, one linear vertical of the understanding necessary to continue these pieces. And the generalist aspect, to his point, is also not that attainable in a lot of cases, right? I've been doing this for 15 years and still feel like I'm only 70% of where I would ever want to be.
The domain is huge, especially when you get into application security. That's like, frankly, 110 degrees different, or 180 degrees different than protecting
secure code development cycle is definitely something separate than putting DHCP.
It's really lame. If you're protecting an enterprise, you have to be an expert in Windows, straight up. I mean, because unless it's, some of the modern SaaS companies are all Mac and it's all in the cloud and it's different, but that's not the norm. The norm is a Windows infrastructure, whether the domain controller is in the cloud. They're almost all hybrid now that we see. There's still some old school on-prems, but you got to know that stuff.
Oh, good,
you can do the same shit. You can still
Alan's been cut off like 19 times. I'm going to go, Alan, go ahead.
I get grief for this all the time, but I when I say this on Twitter, but I'm going to repeat it anyway. I have never walked into a ransomware incident on a primarily Mac network.
Same.
Unless you're in Hong Kong and you're a political dissident against for democracy, and then yes, it's 100% happened yesterday.
Right. I am not saying that ransomware doesn't exist for Macs. I'm just saying I've never seen a mass ransomware incident on a mostly Mac network. Now, admittedly, I know there aren't very many mostly Mac networks, but we
have never seen one once.
Yeah. I know we are really close on time, so maybe bringing this up is probably a bad idea. What do you all think about the Belarus ransomware attack?
Oh, the railway, the shutdown of the railway by people as saying you're transporting troops, we're taking down the railway.
And the beautiful. Extortion being the release of political prisoners.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's just a whole beautiful little topic wrapped up in a gumball, brother. Like that there is everything. I talk about
vigilante. You guys need to run over a bit. So.
Vigilante or nation state? What
vigilante, definitely vigilante.
Really?
I think nation state.
Do you?
I think nation state, false flaggy.
It's a nice cover.
I feel vigilante just because I've watched westerns, You've
been watching too much damn John Wayne again, haven't you?
I have been, bro. It's on me.
Yeah, but I'll say this point. I think it can be both. Most of those westerns you watch, you got to remember the law system out in the Wild West was some dude who happened to have a gun. The government was like, you seem like not murderous enough, so like we're going to give you some authority.
That's how I got this microphone.
Yeah, what's the border anymore? Like, remember the whole debate about APT 29 and Nobelium? Yep. When does it cross over? Is it one? Is it another? Is it nation state? Yeah. I think we draw these lines because we love to think in boxes in cybersecurity, and realistically, they're a lot more fluid. Like a lot more fluid than we really want to give it credit for. Like the Belarusian thing, is that ransomware? When does ransomware not become ransomware? If I don't encrypt something, is it now a wiper? Like if I happen to forget something, if I do crappy code, is it accidental? I think there's a lot of
twice and I don't record what happened there. And
I think we call it destructoware. If
destructoware.
If it's that's our made up.
I think as long as it does not lead back to the Kremlin, it's okay.
Terms, John.
Yeah.
I think that's the big crux of what you're seeing in Russia right now with the two groups that were just taken down. They got too big for their britches and people started associating them with the Kremlin, so they had to go. They got burned. But
I don't care as much about the why. Ultimately, it'd be better to fix some of the glaring problems in the what first, at least here in the United States.
With those guys getting taken down, are they really taken down or just attacking from a different location now?
Dude, TTPs will tell.
I will say it again that a lot of the people that I talk to have been saying that the people who are arrested in the REvil were low level, that the Tor network or the Tor security keys are still there. They're just biding their time and they may shift in to become another entity, the same TTPs. Yeah. I think REvil stuck around kind of like what Shiva said, a little too long. And they didn't rebrand soon enough, like some of the other major actors done or have done in the past. And it was like, all right, you didn't change your company name in time. You're done.
I don't think it's rebranding for them. I think the fact that they were so closely aligned with the Kremlin, where they had to go. Kremlin wants that plausible deniability. They don't want anyone drawing a line from A to B.
Oh, naturally.
Matt. So, anything else, John, Vince, Allan?
No, this was great. I can't wait to do it again.
Stick around. Go. We do our little powwow after. You got some time.
Yeah, the after show party starts in a moment.
All right, Eric, you want to close it out?
Ladies and gentlemen, and ghouls that are out there on the internet, if you have made it this far, thank you so much for tuning in for yet another episode of Amplified and Intensified.com. You know what? A recent change to the platform. Shiva has put together a new website, amplifiedandintensified.com. If you have heard anything that you have liked about this podcast and you want to engage Shiva or myself, or help sponsor by donating us some coffee, all the links of our calendars, buying us coffee, past episodes of both the podcast and the YouTube version are all now on amplifiedandintensified.com. Go there for all of your needs. Thank you so much. And until next time, take care.